Welcome to those of you who are joining our session B3, Building Successful CalAPA Submissions in an Online Environment. It's taken a little while for people to ding in. We still have quite a few coming in, so I'm going to give it about another 30 seconds. So this is a meeting rather than a webinar. So everyone's camera would be on and their microphones would be on, except it's been muted when possible. But we do invite you to use the chat room to write your questions. They have this, specified spots where Melissa and Kitty will take your questions. But as long as we have them there, we can have them queued up and ready to go. And knowing them, I bet they're going to have you use the chat room as they go along as well. So I'm not hearing a lot of more dings, so maybe we're all here. So let me go ahead with introductions, and there's the ding. Our first speaker today is Dr. Melissa Metz-Hall, and she has a keen interest in questioning for deeper learning. Her educational career has included teaching at both the high school and elementary levels, and then administration at the elementary and now the county levels. Don't be surprised if she asks you to tell her more about your instructional context and invite you into the dialogue. Our second speaker is Kitty Fortner, who is an assistant professor at California State University, Dominguez Hills. She works in graduate education with a school leadership program. She is a lead assessor for Cycle 2, and Melissa is a lead assessor for Cycle 3 in the CalAPA. She is deeply committed to helping teachers develop the mindset and disposition needed to lead for liberation in school, where all children are valued for who they are and what they bring to the learning space. Kitty's research interests are leadership identity, leadership, transformative leadership, and liberation leadership. These include things like dispositions, skills, knowledge, and behavior. She's a mom of 2 fur babies who were being very loud a minute ago. And she's an avid plumeria grower and enjoys traveling when there is no COVID-19, no COVID-19. So ladies, I turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you so much, Gay, and welcome in. I am going to do the steering. I am Melissa, and Gay really covered some of the highlights. Again, coming myself from a county office perspective when I talk about our programs, and Kitty from her university perspective. So I think we covered this. Kitty, anything you want to add on to your slide?
No, everything. I think Gay did a really great job of covering that. So I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, so when we think about this technology use, I'll skip right over this. We have technology use that we could use for fun, for engagement.
So this just says
focus.
Performance assessment submit.
Thank you, Gay. We want to focus on the technology use as our candidates are going to experience it in the CalAPA. So I wanted to start with just an overview. I know we might have an audience that some of you might be very familiar with the APA cycles, and some of the folks in the room may be less familiar. So I wanted to start off with a grounding and this overview. So as you may know, there are 3 cycles in the CalAPA. All 3 of the cycles are structured in the same fashion. And by that, I mean that they follow this investigate, plan, act, and reflect. Okay. And then in each of the cycles, the way that candidates engage with technology or how they demonstrate their evidence is a bit different. And that's how Kitty and I have organized our presentation. And we have 3 or 4 areas where we're going to stop and use the chat. Gay's going to help us monitor that, so we appreciate her being here for that. But anyway, we will focus on the technology use mostly in cycle 2. Kitty will take us through that. And then in cycle 3. We also have some similarities that we want to draw your attention to. We'll talk about how they do things. And we hand this over to Kitty.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing wonderfully well today and staying safe. So in cycle 2, what I want to kind of share with you is the first thing is that cycle 2 is really about how do our candidates work with a community of practice? How do they work with the adults that are on their campuses? And it focuses on co-facilitating a collaborative professional learning within a community of practice for the purpose of improving teaching and student learning. So within the cycle, again, like Melissa said, there is investigate, plan, act, and reflect. And the candidate is going to be identifying and working with a small group of educators at their school site to identify a problem of practice. And then the group will jointly determine one relevant strategy that they're going to use to address that problem. And that's going to also strengthen and increase an equitable learning at that school site. The group will implement the evidence-based strategy. And then after they've implemented the evidence-based strategy, they will have meetings to, like they will just have their community of practice meetings where they will check on implementation, get implementation results, and in reflecting on those results, they will they will make modifications and adjustments and next steps for their plan. They have to videotape those, video record those meetings so that they can get evidence. And then the last step is that reflect step, where they will be reflecting on their equity-based leadership and how they did in that process. So the components that we're going to truly focus on is the step 3, which is the video recordings of the meetings that they're going to be taking. Okay, thank you. We can't hear you, Melissa.
So it's like for cycle 3, I caught myself, thank you. I'm going to kind of start large and then go into the specifics that are here on the slide. So cycle 3 is about coaching for teacher growth. And if we think about the CalAPA cycle 3, the candidate is responsible for providing evidence that they can coach. I know the assessment guide says that much better than I, but when we really just cut down to it, we need evidence that they being the candidate, can coach someone about their teaching practice. So as you can see on the slide, they start off finding out about this teacher. We call them their volunteer teacher. And they start off by finding out about their volunteer teacher's context, what the coaching practices have been at the volunteer teacher's site. Just a side note on that. we don't want to assume that the volunteer teacher and the candidate are on the same school site. And for those of you, many of you in the space today, you're supporting folks who are now working on their clear. And so you don't know yet until you talk to these individuals whether their volunteer teacher is even working for the same agency or district. So the investigate is really important so that they can understand what are the structures in place for the volunteer teacher. Think of it also as if you were in your first administrative role, you would want to know what have the practices been in the past? What do I need to know about coaching? And making sure that it's more, it is about coaching. It's not just about some of the things that we have seen folks talk with us a lot about or provide a lot of evidence about evaluation. We really want to make sure this is about coaching for growth. So anyway, that step 1, investigate, is really important. But starting in step 2 is when they start to provide video evidence. And so as Kitty and I take us through the rest of our content, we really want to give you some ideas on how to make that be successful. What can a successful submission look like when we're using the technology and needing all of these videos? And then so in step 3, even possibly more videos. We'll go into the specifics, and those specifics are in the assessment guides. And then step 4 is reflection. And in both step 2 and step 3, that reflection can be a video reflection. Okay? We don't see those as often as we see the narrative. The narratives are still really preponderance of what we're receiving or looking at in these submissions have been narratives, but they can indeed use a video. And in the assessment guide, I know Gay's on here, but we'll want to make sure that that's a 5-minute. And so those time limits are important, and we'll talk you through that as well. So that's an overview, but I just wanted, again, not knowing where everyone in the room is with your experience, we thought that part was important. So this is one of our first questions that we have for you. What we'd like to see is what's on your mind. And so Kitty, I'll person the chat. If you want to give them maybe some ideas or some sentence frames on this.
Yeah, so we're actually wanting to know, we do not know exactly where anybody is here as far as it comes to cycle 3 and cycle 2. And what we'd like to know is what are you wondering about as far as in regards to an online submission? You could be thinking about what platforms might be used. You might be saying, I'm wondering when my candidate has their video, their conference, and they're doing a video conference, or if they're having their meetings and they're using this online platform, who needs to be seen in the videos? You might be wondering, how do they show consensus, because they have to show that they are making a decision together? How do they show that consensus, or how do they jointly determine something on video? So that's what we're asking you right now to think about.
And to put in the chat.
You can just drop it in the chat, and we're going to see what's on folks' minds.
I can tell folks are typing, so that's great.
Yes, it takes a moment to get up there.
Gosh.
Thinking about that online submission for cycle 2 and cycle 3. What about when teacher agency has provided any recording online teaching? Okay. Has prohibited, I see it. And that's something we can talk about also.
Thank you for that, Angel.
Yes. What are the tips and tricks for candidates to use to make online submission easy for evaluators to assess? Okay, nice. Students do have change the camera. Students do not have to be on camera. Is okay?
Yeah. Could I answer that one right now,
Go
Kitty?
for it. Yes, yes.
So for the APA submission, the candidate, the admin candidate, does not have to provide video in their submission of the students, not in their submission. However, when we talk about tips and tricks, the candidate does need to be able to see their volunteer teacher teaching, and they need to be able to record that. So again, we'll go over that, but as far as what they're submitting to be evaluated on, they do not send video of students, yet they have to have access to and be able to videotape their volunteer teacher teaching. And that's where the student video comes in. And then we'll talk about edits and such.
Yes. And there is one here that I would like to check in with too. They ask about the group members changing in the community of practice over time. And can the candidate proceed with different group members? And the answer to that is yes, they can. We recognize that they need to have 3 to 5 candidates in 3 to 5 members of their community of practice. However, we understand sometimes things happen, and sometimes people are sick or they're unable to continue and they need to get someone new. That just needs to be reflected in their step 1 when they identify their community of practice. They may want to just add that next person in, and then in the videos, what the assessors are looking for are numbers of people. They're looking to see, one, if it's a consistent group, but they're also looking to see numbers. So they know that they're supposed to have 3 to 5 members. So some meetings, if someone didn't come, they're not going to be a ding as long as they have that at least three members and a candidate. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but yes, they can change over time, and that is okay. The next one about edits, we will talk about that as we go through the presentation. So thank you. Thank you for those who asked those questions. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Absolutely. All right. So we're going to take us through the what, the why, the how. Kitty's going to lay the groundwork for that.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what is the online environment look like? Why do we need to make these changes? And then how is that going to play into what we're doing with our candidates? How does that lay out? What changes might need to be made? And what is it going to look like, basically?
Okay.
So in this first one, for cycle 2, again, it's in step 3 that we're looking at specifically, and that is the recording of the community of practice meetings, both the planning meeting and the implementation meetings, because evidence will be taken from both those meetings to be able to use for scoring of the assessment. So cycle 2, we have in step 3, there's 3 video recordings that are 5 minutes each. And in those video recordings, the students, I'm saying cycle 3. In cycle 2, in cycle 2, step 3, I just got through completing cycle 3 with my candidate. So I'm like, but in cycle 2, step 3, we have 3 5-minute video recordings of community of practice meetings. So inside, there's something from the beginning of the meeting that has to do with the norms and purpose of the meeting. And the second video has to do with the middle of the meeting, which is maintaining focus and energy, redirecting. It has to do with the way that the candidates are facilitating or co-facilitating the meeting. How are they inviting voice into the meeting? How are they getting involvement into the meeting? And then the third video has to do with jointly determining next steps. So this is the progress that we've come to so far. What's the next steps that we have to do? And how do we do that? Getting input from diverse viewpoints and diverse perspectives, and then coming to some kind of consensus on what our next steps will be. So that's what we're looking at in step 2, in cycle 2, step 3.
Great. Thanks, Kitty. All right, so we're going to talk about cycle 3 next. So step 2, as you see on the screen, this is their planning meeting. So think of their planning meeting as a pre-observation where they are allowed 2 video uploads. Those are my words. That's what I call them. So they have 2 video uploads in step 2. And so think of the pre-observation meeting perhaps that you all conduct with your teachers, and maybe those last about 15 or 20 minutes. They are not permitted to go that long. Those video uploads, each one of them should be 4 minutes. So a total in step 2, a total of 8 minutes. So I had a question about the length up here, but again, two videos for their planning. There are times when, because these are novices, right? These are folks who are just learning some of these skills, or maybe they have a little more skill now that they've moved into their CLEAR program, but they don't necessarily get everything in those 4 minutes. They may not cut and edit. It's very, very clearly written in the assessment guide. So I know somebody had that question in the chat. So they are, again, their conversation may truly have been 15 minutes. They need to give us, if they're going to do 4 and 4, they need to provide 2 4-minute, uncut, unedited clips of their planning conversation. Okay, they must be visible, and volunteer teacher must be visible. Okay. Then similarly in step 3, which is ACT. Okay. In the ACT section portion, they may submit up to 5 videos, but they also must be unedited. Okay. So up to 5, we need to see the volunteer teacher and the candidate both. And Melody, excellent. Melody is clarifying up to 4 minutes. You're absolutely right. Thanks, Melody. Up to 4 minutes for the plan videos. And then let me address another one of the questions in the chat. They must provide evidence that they have recorded the teacher teaching and that they and the volunteer have looked at this video and they're using this video as evidence. We do not need to see the video being played. So there's lots of different ways that they can provide evidence. They might have like a laptop or a notebook in front of them and say, I'd like to draw your attention, these are my words, but they might say something like, I'd like to draw your attention to the timestamp of when you were asking for volunteers. That's evidence that they have looked at the video and that they're using the video for reflection. We also might hear them say, when you looked at the video, if they ask this of their volunteer teacher, when you looked at the video, did you have any highlights that you wanted to share? Some way that we know that that video has been used. Okay, Kitty, I'm going to hand this over to you here.
All right. So I do want to answer a really quick question. There was one about if this is site-based. So when students get into their CAS program and their induction portion of their program, sometimes they're not at a specific site. They might be at a district level or whatever. But yes, this assessment, all of the assessment is site-based. So they need to pick, if they have 4 or 5 sites that they're working with, they can choose one of those sites and dig into the data at that one site and the needs of that one site and a group of adults at that one site that they want to work with. Now, those adults can be teachers or counselors or however it is, but they do need to be able to work with students because you're looking at student well-being or student academic achievement. So yes, it does need to be at a site and it needs to be working with the adults at specific sites. I know in my program, I have several candidates who are out of class and they're counselors. So they have a group of counselors that they're working with and they're counselors that are at different sites. So they've chosen one counselor and they go to that counselor to their school to do their community of practice meetings and they focus on the data from that particular school. So that's how they bring it back to the one site. So yes, and they could be doing the same thing at all the sites, but they're only focusing on the data for that one site because they can't spread themselves that thin. Okay. Thanks, Melody, for that question. So why do we need to do this? Why do we need to get these evidence and make sure that we're being successful in our online environment? Part of it is because the rubrics are asking for that. So if we were in a face-to-face and they had the video recorded, they have to record their meeting anyway. So recording their meeting, there's some things that just naturally will take place. You can see all the people in the recording. The conversation is generally easy when people are coming to consensus about something. You can see that conversation taking place. You can see heads nodding. You can see people off. The same things take place in the virtual, but the problem is in the virtual setting, we're not always attuned to what's happening. People could what is it called, ghosting, when they turn off their videos and you don't know if they're there or not. So we want to make sure that those things are not happening when we're doing this, because if that happens, then the assessors can't technically score that portion. So in the rubric, it's rubric 2.5 and 2.6 that we're looking at. And we train assessors to look at level 3 of 2.5 and 2.6. And something that they're going to be looking at is co-facilitation skills. So when we say co-facilitation, we're actually talking about how are the candidates working with the the community of practice to solve this problem together. It's not just the candidate leading a PD or the candidate giving instructions or the candidate doing something on their own. It's how are they leading in a co-facilitated manner. And so some of the things that we're looking for in that, what the rubric is asking for is that they establish, review, and use their norms. It's also asking them for them to document group decisions, facilitate like a collaborative process, respect diverse viewpoints, and maintain group focus and energy. And I said that a little bit earlier, but it's also asking them to jointly determine next step and also asking for the candidate to be able to check understanding. So when the candidate is in this conversation, some of these things need to be taking place. And the biggest part of this is they have to annotate what they're doing. So they have to know what they're doing. So when it says checking for understanding, the candidate's not going to annotate and say, I was checking for understanding. The candidate is going to kind of explain what they were doing and why that was leadership, why they were doing that, and connecting it back to what the whole process is, what their educational focus is, or what their strategy is, or whatever's taking place in at that moment during their conversation. Shared decision making. There's a lot of the in the rubric that says jointly determined or collaboratively decided. So they have to show that. They have to invite people's voice into that conversation. It's as if they could say, so does everybody agree? And they could give a thumbs up, or they can say lots of different things, but these are the whys. We really need to make sure that these are evident in the video clip, because in rubric 2.5, all evidence come from those 3 5-minute video clips. So it's really imperative that candidates are really conscientious of how the clips that they're choosing to submit, because these are the components that the assessors are going to look at. There was a question also, how can the candidate help the assessor to see what they're looking at? I tell my candidates, use the language of the rubric. Use the language of the rubric when you're making a decision. So if the rubric says, let's see, what is it saying? Maintaining a group focus and energy. And you're calling on people and you're asking questions, and there's a really vibrant conversation going on. When the candidate writes their annotation, they might say, I maintained focus and energy by, and then they go into what they were doing and then why they were doing that. So use that language of the rubric, which makes it very clear, and it's to the point for the assessor to be able to see those things. Another thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we remind our candidates to use asset-based conversations, and when they're talking about the students, or asset-based when they're doing their writing, they're talking about students. When they're in the conversation with their volunteer teacher, they also want to say asset things that are positives rather than negatives, rather than saying, well, my kids only know Spanish, they don't know any English. They could say, they come with a very rich background in their Spanish, in their home language. However, when we're working in English, we need to give them this. So you're using those asset-based, they're using asset-based tone, asset-based language when they're talking about children specifically. And that goes for cycle 2 and cycle 3. We want to make sure, even in those community of practice, if a teacher comes up and they start to say something that's a deficit-based, that candidate knows that as the leader for that group, they can come in and say, oh, when I think about that, and they change that to an asset-based approach. And so that's something that we need to help our candidates to understand a little bit easier. And then I think also another reason why we're doing this is there's a lot of joint co-analysis, co-facilitation, collaborative, two-way conversations that are taking place. It's not just, I'm asking you a question and you're answering it. It's really, how are we dialogue? What is this dialogue looking like? So those are some of the pieces. Those are some of the reasons why we want to make sure that candidates have the best resources so that they can have the best online experience that they can with their submission. Okay.
All right, so thanks, Kitty. So to Kitty's points, and all the points that were on the previous slide, we want to think about what platform is going to provide the best opportunity for your candidates. And the short answer is the platform that they're going to be comfortable with, and a platform that's going to allow for the best opportunity to provide that evidence. So you heard a lot from Kitty about co-facilitating or co-deciding, or that idea that we need, as I already said, we need to see and hear the candidate and the volunteer teacher. So I myself use Zoom quite a lot, and there's different ways that we can set up our Zoom. We can set it up to speaker mode. We can set it up to gallery. Either setting is fine. So they can submit, let's say it's the planning conversation. They can submit a video that shows them in one frame and then the candidate in another. That would be acceptable. But it's stronger if we can see both of them simultaneously. Google does that nicely. It doesn't matter. They're not going to be judged or evaluated on that, but it's what's going to be the best tool for them so that we really can see all of the evidence that they want us, that they're providing to us so that we can score. I wanted to draw your attention to the chat, and Gay is letting us know if your questions don't get answered that they have their office hours on Thursday, they being commission staff. And so you might want to grab that link, and that's the CalAPA. Wanted to let you know that that's there. I had a chat. I was going to find out what platforms you thought folks were using, but why don't I not pause? And if you want to share a platform that you think is particularly helpful, you could go ahead and put that in the chat. I do want to get into a few more details before our time's up. So Kitty was talking about the importance of this collaboration. When we think about in cycle 3 that this is about coaching, there's a lot of coaching language that changes it from a question and answer period to a coaching. Using video, that video, as I said earlier, provides that third point. It provides an opportunity for the candidate and the volunteer teacher to be able to talk about a piece of evidence. Student work also is, hopefully it's not just one piece of student work, but that's also evidence that they can talk about. They can ask those probing questions, they can paraphrase. All of those are important when we think about what we're looking for in the rubric. So again, thinking about what platform is going to provide that best opportunity for them to have these collaborative conversations. As Kitty mentioned, there's different strategies for consensus. I think we probably covered that. Just they need to think a little bit differently in this environment. And Kitty, do you just want to reiterate have you seen all of those, and those are all satisfactory, right?
Yeah.
At moments like this, does it remind you that
Hold on a second. Yeah, there are lots of different ways to do to make sure that students are.
We lost you, Kitty.
Sorry.
There you go.
I got muted. Can you hear me now? Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, okay. Sorry. Yes, there's lots of different ways, and it can be fun too, to help them with thumbs up. They can give the high five. They can do different things visually, because again, if we were in a face-to-face setting, that is a little bit more easy to see. But here, when you're on the Zoom, and when everyone talks at once, I don't know that you can't really hear everyone. So it kind of mutes in and out some components. So having everybody say yes at one time doesn't always work out. You can go across asking people yes, and they can say yes, but you can also have them say yes by raising their hands or giving a thumbs up, or using those tools that are a part of the different platforms that you have. So there's reaction tools, there's tools in the chat, the yes, no chat, the voting. You can use all of those tools to share and say where you are to bring consensus. One thing really quickly, there was a question about candidates at the same school site for the PLCs. I do want to, what's the word? I want to warn you a little bit about having candidates use the same PLCs, because the problem is when they walk away, if they do PLCs together and they write together, what's going to happen is when they come back and turn their work in, it's going to look very, very, very similar. And everything goes through a system. I'm not sure what the system name is, but it's kind of like Turnitin. So when you send it through the system, before it even comes to an assessor, it gets checked for originality. And so that's a very important point when you're working your PLCs, or when you're working with your volunteer teachers, and you want to make sure that the candidates are doing their own work. So I would encourage them to be in separate groups, or have two smaller groups that they're working with, or two different projects, or the same project with two different emphases. That might help. Something that distinguishes them as separate.
And Kitty, if I can jump in and reiterate that with an exclamation point that's very, very large, that
Yes.
it requires those candidates to turn in separate meetings. So 2 separate planning meetings and different implementation meetings. So they'd have to have 6 of them for them to put in different implementation meetings, or it will be flagged.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, I want to bring Nancy's question back into the space. And her question, as I understand it, was about organizing. She says, what recommendations do you have for organizing a video reflection? So Nancy, if you're speaking about the step number 4, so there's a few, there's a narrative. And I guess this person or these candidates are choosing to use a video instead of the narrative. I would suggest first and foremost that they look at the assessment guide, that they look at, for cycle 3, there's 2 rubrics which are applied to step 4. Sorry, throwing all these numbers at y'all. But in cycle 3, the reflect step, which is that step 4, it has 2 different rubrics, and they really are asking and looking for connected things, but quite different areas of content. Following the narrative will give them, if that's they're going to write themselves a script perhaps, which I would highly recommend. If they use the narrative, that's going to get them most of the way there for a successful submission. But what they tend to do is just kind of answer the questions in part and not bring it all together. Okay, so I would say look at the rubrics, look at the narrative, write themselves a script, and bring it all together and really understand what's being asked. This is not just about how did you do on this and what do you think and what did your volunteer. It's asking them to synthesize and make some plans for themselves towards being an equitable leader. So it's not just reflection on this experience, it's reflection on the experience and how and what they're going to do in a much larger scale. So they'll be talking about building trust and rapport. They'll talk about their use perhaps of the CSTPs, but really they need to wrap that up and talk about what they still need to work on in the larger picture of how they're going to work with their staff. Okay, so sometimes they just get a little too narrow in what they think they're addressing.
And I'd like to add to what Melissa just said. For cycle 2, it is very strong, that strong emphasis on being an equitable leader. And again, the idea that looking at the questions is not enough. You really have to go back to the rubric to see what exactly is it that you're trying to answer. What is that essential question asking you? And what are the rubric constructs asking for as you move forward? So with cycle 2, they're looking at your leadership growth in relations to the results of the implementation and in results of the feedback that you received from your community of practice. So that means Is there somewhere in there that it requested feedback? Yes, there was a place that was saying you need to get feedback from your community of practice. And then how are you using that to show your growth or show your proficiency as a equitable leader using that equity lens? And there was a question also that asked about coaching. And I know that you're going to get to that one, Melissa. But one of the things that I wanted to say, it was from Sandra. One of the things that I wanted to say for the coaching is, yeah, it's true that administrators are not full-time coaches. However, in administrative programs and their preliminary programs, all administrators should be going through some type of training for coaching in their instruction class. And so how to improve teacher growth, that would be a portion. And they should have some resources that they do bring with them when it comes to those coaching skills. And I would encourage all of you, if you're working in an induction program, to reach out, reach back, reach to those preliminary programs and the CalAPA coordinator on your campuses, and allow them to support you as you support your candidates.
Great. I think our time is up here, Kitty. And I want to tell everyone in the room, I know there's another session. It might be this next time coming up where folks are going to talk about support between the PASC and the CASC programs. So I know there's a couple of other opportunities. Sandra, the other thing I would say, we don't prescribe a certain type of coaching training. You know, there's many that are great and very much have some similar components. So that's not part of the rubric, but it is the stance that they're working as a coach, and that to work as a coach, I'm going to work with this individual, as opposed to, well, here's what I collected, here's what I'm going to tell you, and then we're going to move on in an evaluative manner. Gay, are you still here? I think we need to close out.
You actually have 8 more minutes. When I typed, my finger missed hitting a 0.
Oh, excellent.
1 minute left when you had 10 minutes left. I apologize.
Well, I have the slide up here.
Because I was like, why are we so quick?
Excellent. So any thoughts from what you've heard thus far about what you might or how you might support your candidate in regards to that video recording? Any pearls of wisdom that you heard that you might share?
And you can drop those in the chat, and that way we can keep an eye on those as we finish up the presentation. But that would be really great.
Okay. So hopefully some ideas will come in. Kitty, this is you here.
Okay. So for some final just check-in pieces and like just final tips to get us through this step 3 in cycle 2 is, in the conducting of that planning meeting, there's a couple of things that we really know that candidates need to be reminded of on a constant. One is that there has to be at least 3, and I've said this previously, but at least 3 members of their community of practice must be seen on that video. They may be seen in gallery. If it's gallery view and they're all up there at the same time, there would be the 4 people. But oftentimes candidates are new with their platform. So they need to make sure within each 5-minute clip that you see each one of the people. And that means they each have to talk, because if they're doing speaker view, then when someone speaks, the picture will pop up and you will see them. Our assessors know to look for, in speaker view, they know to look for each one of the persons and to count. That's just a minor change that they had to make, is to count to make sure there was enough people in the community of practice. Another very important piece is that there is no editing of these clips. No editing, no music, no breaks, no subtitles, no headers, no splicing together, no editing at all. Our assessors are looking for edits. These must be continuous video clips, and they just have to find a portion or a chunk that works for them. And in meeting norms, just a quick check between meeting norms and online norms. A lot of times candidates will start off with their online norms, meaning, your videos need to be on, mute yourself, making sure that everybody is participating, those types of things. But what we really are talking about when they're asking for meeting norms, they're asking for the norms as if it was a face-to-face or any kind of meeting. So your standards for your meeting, that, we will honor the time. We'll start on time, end on time. We will use asset-based voices. We will honor the words of people when they're talking, not interrupting, whatever those norms are that they would like to set for their group. But they are actually meeting norms. They're not just the online internet norms or the platform norms for that platform.
All right, so I think I've covered most of this. Candidate and volunteer must be visible in the clips. Annotation titles, we haven't talked too much. Kitty mentioned that. All annotation titles must be used within the allotted time. Mm-hmm. So let me go back to step 2, where I mentioned that there are 2 videos, and those videos may be up to 4 minutes each. Across that time, they must use, there are 4 required annotations. Okay, so if they had a video that was too long and their annotation were after the allotted time, it cannot be used and they receive a condition code. And that results in the necessity to redo. Okay, so the annotations must be used at least once within the allotted time. Just a couple of other pointers on cycle 3. Now this says step 3 act, but I just want to tell you about the CSTPs. Not all agencies use the CSTPs. Some use other frameworks, and that is, of course, that's their reality. But they would need to bring whatever other framework they're using and kind of do a crosswalk or a correlation. So they need to identify this one of the 6 CSTPs. And I'm going to say the CSTP element. Mm-hmm. In order to do provide targeted feedback and really hone in on something in the teacher's teaching environment, we really want them to just choose one CSTP element. So they usually start off broadly by talking about a CSTP, but then they need to get in there and get focused collaboratively, jointly with the volunteer, and have a clear idea of which CSTP element that they are going to focus on. Okay, and then identify, as you see on that last dot here, identify the evidence. So if Kitty were my volunteer teacher, I might say, so Kitty, we know that we're going to focus on engagement, and you've asked me to look at the student responses, and what is it that you want me to collect? Or are we going to look at the student product from this lesson, and we're going to look at that together in addition to perhaps my tally marks, something of that nature. But we want them to jointly identify. All right, so I'm going to jump us ahead. We're getting the 2-minute here, Kitty. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes, 2 minutes.
This is our second to last slide. So, so my thoughts here. We did not mention this earlier, but the lesson that this candidate records needs to be a synchronous teaching experience. Okay, so if they're choosing a volunteer and the volunteer is not teaching synchronously, that's not the right volunteer to use. That's not the right volunteer teacher. They need a teacher that is teaching synchronously. And I think that's probably easier this fall than it was last spring. That may have been more of a challenge in the spring, but make sure that's one way that you can help them. Talk with them about who they're thinking about using as their volunteer teacher, and make sure that they're going to have an opportunity to be in that space. Again, we want them to be able to practice these observation skills and feedback, of course, but we want to be able to practice these observation skills in as close to real time as what they're going to experience. And I think my time is up. Gay, for the good of the order, I'm going to say thank you to everyone. I know that she has some options for other questions. And Sandra, you're very welcome. We'll scroll through the chat. And then Gay, thank you again for this opportunity, and everyone for being with us.
Thank you both for Kitty and Melissa, and these are recorded if you wanted to revisit this. They will be posted on the Commission's web channel soon. And 10-minute bio break, take a stretch, grab a drink, visit the restroom, but meet us at our next breakout at 11:10. Thank you.